The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies, a cloying combination that made Ethan's throat feel tight. He stood near a marble pillar, the cool stone a welcome anchor in the swirling sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. He felt like a ghost at the feast, a low-level data analyst invited to the Thorn Industries annual gala out of corporate obligation. His own suit was off the rack, carefully preserved for occasions like this, and it felt like a costume he could not wait to shed. He resisted the urge to check his phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. Lily was with his neighbor, a kind, retired woman who adored her, but the anxiety never truly subsided. It was a low hum beneath the surface of his thoughts, a constant reminder of the precious, fragile center of his universe. His thumb brushed against the worn, multicolored friendship bracelet peeking out from under his cuff. Lily had made it for him last week, a messy, earnest creation of knotted embroidery floss. It was his realest possession in this room of glittering artifice. A subtle shift in the room's energy, a magnetic pull, drew his attention toward the grand entrance. Julian Thorn had arrived. He moved not with overt command, but with an inherent stillness that made everyone else seem loud and frantic by comparison. He was the company's chief executive officer, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the corporate corridors. He was younger than most men in his position, with dark hair that was just a little too long to be considered conservative, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Ethan had only ever seen him from a distance, a figure on a stage at company-wide meetings, or a fleeting presence in the executive elevator. Up close, even from across the room, the man's presence was overwhelming. He listened to a board member with an expression of polite interest, but his gaze was distant, sweeping over the crowd with a detached assessment that made Ethan feel suddenly and completely invisible. It was a feeling he was used to, and one he usually welcomed. Tonight, for some reason, it stung. Julian Thorn felt the familiar weight of the evening settle on his shoulders. These events were a necessary performance, a dance of power and influence he had mastered long ago. He smiled, he shook hands, he absorbed flattery and deflected probing questions with an ease that felt like a second skin. Yet beneath it all, a profound sense of isolation gnawed at him. He was surrounded by people, but he was utterly alone, the architect of a world so controlled and sterile that there was no room left for anything genuine to breathe. His gaze drifted, skimming over the faces seeking his attention, and snagged on a man standing alone by a pillar. The man was unremarkable at first glance, lost in the opulent backdrop. But there was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that mirrored Julian's own, though born of a different source. It was not power, but a deep, weary resilience. The man absently touched a colorful, childish bracelet on his wrist, and the small, unconscious gesture was so out of place, so achingly authentic, that it held Julian's attention longer than any of the practiced smiles directed his way. He did not know the man's name, but he felt a flicker of something he could not immediately identify. A resonance. A question. Then, the delicate performance of the evening shattered. A man with a predatory smile and eyes that were too bright, too focused, cut a path through the crowd, heading directly for the man by the pillar. Ethan saw him coming, and his entire body went rigid. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and stark against the dark marble. Mark. The name was a shard of ice in his chest. He had not seen his ex-husband in over 2 years, not since the final, screaming fight and the blessed, silent finality of the divorce papers. To see him here, in this place, felt like a violation of a sanctuary Ethan had painstakingly built for himself and Lily. "Ethan, I should have known I'd find you lurking in the shadows," Mark said, his voice a low sneer that was meant to sound like a joke but landed like a punch. "Still trying to convince people you belong?"
"Mark, what are you doing here?"
Ethan's voice was a strained whisper. He wanted to run, to disappear, but he was frozen, pinned by the weight of 1,000 terrible memories. Networking. My new firm is courting Thorn Industries. Imagine my surprise when I saw your name on the guest list. Mark stepped closer, invading his personal space, his scent of expensive, sharp cologne a suffocating cloud. You look thin. Is she running you ragged? You always did let that kid walk all over you. The mention of Lily was a deliberate cruelty, a knife twisted with expert precision. Ethan flinched. Leave her out of this. You need to go. I don't think so. Mark's hand shot out, grabbing Ethan's arm just above the elbow. His grip was painfully tight, a familiar brand of ownership. We have things to discuss, you and me, for old time's sake. He started to pull Ethan toward a side exit, his smile turning vicious. Panic clawed at Ethan's throat. He could feel the stares of those nearby, the curious, pitying glances. His professional life, so carefully constructed, was about to be immolated in a public scene of his own private horror. I believe the gentleman asked you to leave. The voice was quiet, cold, and cut through the ballroom's murmur like a razor. It came from behind Ethan, so close the low vibration seemed to travel through his bones. Both Ethan and Mark froze. Julian Thorn had moved without a sound. He stood beside them, his expression unreadable but his eyes holding a chilling lack of warmth as he looked at Mark's hand on Ethan's arm. He had not raised his voice, yet he commanded the absolute attention of everyone within earshot. Mark, to his credit, recovered quickly, his shock morphing into an oily charm. Mr. Thorn, Mark Coulson, a pleasure. I was just catching up with an old acquaintance. He did not release his grip. Julian's gaze flickered from Mark's hand to Ethan's pale, terrified face. A decision, swift and absolute, was made in that instant. He took a small step forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Ethan, a subtle but unmistakable shield. He smiled, a slow, deliberate curving of his lips that held no humor at all. That's interesting, Julian said, his voice dropping to a confidential, dangerous purr. Because I was under the impression you were interrupting my husband. The word hung in the air. A stunning, impossible grenade. Ethan's heart stopped. He stared at the back of Julian Thorn's perfectly tailored jacket, his mind a complete blank. Mark's jaw went slack. His grip on Ethan's arm loosened in his shock. Julian did not look at Ethan. He kept his focus entirely on Mark, his eyes like chips of ice. He reached out, not with aggression, but with a languid, deliberate motion, and placed his hand on the small of Ethan's back. The touch was a shock of warmth through the thin fabric of his shirt, a steady, grounding pressure that was the polar opposite of Mark's bruising grip. Forgive me, Julian continued, his tone smooth as silk. We value our privacy. Now if you'll excuse us. It was not a request. It was a dismissal. He gently guided Ethan away, turning his back on Mark as if he had ceased to exist. The surrounding crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, their whispers following in their wake. Julian did not stop until they were through a set of glass doors and out on a secluded stone terrace. The cool night air was a relief, washing over Ethan's heated skin. The distant sounds of the city were a murmur beneath the lingering music from the gala. He was shaking, a fine tremor running through his entire body. The hand on his back remained, a solid point of contact in a world that had just tilted off its axis. Are you all right? Julian's voice was different out here. The icy edge was gone, replaced by a low, quiet concern. He finally removed his hand, and Ethan felt the loss of its warmth immediately. Ethan leaned against the stone balustrade, dragging a shaky hand through his hair. He could not bring himself to look at the chief executive officer of his company. Yes, thank you. You didn't have to do that. He had his hands on you. Julian stated simply, as if that explained everything. You looked like you needed an exit. An exit, yes, not a husband. The word felt absurd on his tongue. He finally risked a glance at the man beside him. In the soft glow of the terrace lights, Julian Thorne looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man shrouded in shadows, his expression thoughtful and intense. A faint smile touched Julian's lips. Desperate times. It seemed like the most effective tool for the situation. I apologize if I overstepped. No, it was effective. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry. I'm sorry you were dragged into my personal drama. That was Mark, my ex-husband. The admission felt like a surrender, a confession of a past failure he kept carefully hidden. Julian just nodded, his gaze fixed on the skyline. He did not ask for details. He did not pry. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was a shared space, a moment of quiet reprieve from the chaos inside. He won't be a problem for Thorne Industries, Julian said after a moment. I'll have security ensure he's removed from the premises, and our list of potential partners will be revised first thing in the morning. The sheer, effortless power in that statement was staggering. A problem that had haunted Ethan for years, solved in a single sentence. Thank you, Ethan said again, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. My name is Ethan Hayes, by the way. I'm in the analytics department. I know, Julian said softly. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. Julian finally turned to look at him fully. I make it a point to know who works for me, Mr. Hayes. The formality was back, but it felt different now, less a barrier and more a habit. Your work on the quarterly efficiency projections was excellent. Ethan was floored. The chief executive officer had not only noticed him, but had read his work. He felt a flush of heat rise in his cheeks, a mixture of professional pride and personal confusion. This entire night had become surreal. The car will be around in 5 minutes, Julian said, checking his watch. Allow me to give you a ride home. I doubt either of us has much appetite left for the party. Before Ethan could protest, Julian was already heading for the door, holding it open for him. As Ethan passed, Julian's hand brushed his back again, a fleeting, barely there touch. It was nothing, a simple gesture of courtesy, but it sent a jolt through Ethan's system, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man who had, for one bewildering moment, called himself his husband. The ride in Julian's car was a silent, cocooning experience. The vehicle was a sleek black sedan that moved through the city streets with a hushed purr. The leather seats were cool against Ethan's skin, and the air was scented faintly with something clean and expensive that was simply Julian's own scent. Ethan gave the address to his modest apartment building, feeling a fresh wave of self-consciousness. It was a world away from the gleaming towers and opulent ballrooms Julian inhabited. Julian did not seem to notice or care. He simply gave the address to his driver and settled back into his seat, his profile etched against the passing city lights. He seemed lost in thought, and Ethan was content to let the silence remain, his own mind replaying the evening's events on a loop. The shock of seeing Mark, the terror of his touch, the impossible, solid presence of Julian Thorne. When they pulled up in front of his building, the driver moved to get out, but Julian stopped him with a quiet word. He opened his own door and came around to Ethan's side. It was a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt both startling and deeply considerate. Thank you again, Mr. Thorne, Ethan said, standing on the curb. For everything. Julian, he corrected gently. And you are welcome, Ethan. The use of his first name felt significant, a shift in the very ground beneath his feet. He met Julian's eyes in the dim light of the street lamp. The stormy gray was softer now, holding an unreadable expression. For a moment, Ethan thought he might say something more, but then he just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Julian. Ethan watched the car pull away, its red taillights disappearing around the corner. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the cool night air doing little to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He felt as though he had been caught in a hurricane and deposited somewhere new and unfamiliar, a place where the most powerful man he had ever met had shielded him with a lie that had felt, for one terrifying and exhilarating moment, more real than anything else. The next morning, a Saturday, Ethan was trying to erase the memory of the gala with the comforting ritual of pancake making. Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, sat at their small kitchen table, diligently drawing what appeared to be a purple giraffe with an impressive number of legs. The smell of batter and melting butter filled the small apartment, a familiar scent of home and safety. A sharp knock on the door made him jump, sloshing a bit of batter onto the stove. He was not expecting anyone. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to the door, peering through the peephole. It was Julian Thorne. Ethan stared for a full 10 seconds, convinced he was hallucinating. Julian Thorne was standing outside his apartment door, dressed not in a suit, but in dark jeans and a soft gray cashmere sweater. He looked impossibly out of place in the faded, slightly scuffed hallway of the building. He held a large paper bag from a high-end bakery. Ethan opened the door, his mind reeling. Julian? What? How? Good morning, Ethan, Julian said, his voice calm, as if showing up unannounced at a subordinate's apartment on a Saturday was a perfectly normal occurrence. I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in, see how you were doing after last night. He was not in the neighborhood. His penthouse, as Ethan knew from a business magazine profile, was in the most exclusive part of the city, miles away. The excuse was so transparent, it was almost charming. I'm fine, thank you. Ethan was at a loss. Do you want to come in? If it's not a bad time. Julian's eyes flickered past Ethan into the apartment, and his expression softened. Daddy, who is it? Lily's bright voice piped up from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, clutching her drawing, her eyes wide with curiosity as she stared up at the tall stranger. This is a friend from work, sweetie, Ethan managed, stepping back to let Julian inside. This is Julian. Julian, this is my daughter, Lily. Julian crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to her level. It was a small, instinctive movement that disarmed Ethan completely. It's very nice to meet you, Lily. I brought pastries. He offered the bag to her. Lily's eyes lit up. She took the bag, which was nearly as big as her torso, and peeked inside. Croissants! The flaky kind, she announced with grave importance. She then looked Julian up and down, her head tilted. You're very big. A genuine smile broke through Julian's reserved facade, transforming his face. I suppose I am. Are you my daddy's new husband? The question dropped into the room with the force of a small bomb. Ethan choked on his own breath, his face flaming with mortification. Lily, no! Where did you hear that? Lily looked from her father's horrified face to Julian's surprisingly calm one. Mrs. Henderson next door was talking on the phone. She said Daddy got a fancy new husband at the fancy party. Is that you? Ethan wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was going to have a very pointed conversation with Mrs. Henderson about gossip. But Julian did not laugh or look uncomfortable. He looked at Lily with a serious expression. Your father and I are friends, he said gently. And I was helping him with a problem last night. But it's very sharp of you to pay such close attention. Lily seemed to accept this explanation. She held up her drawing. This is for you. It's a giraffe. He has lots of legs so he can run away from mean people. Julian took the drawing with a reverence usually reserved for fine art. He studied the chaotic purple creature. "Thank you, Lily. This is the best giraffe I have ever seen. I'll put it up in my office." He looked up at Ethan over Lily's head, and there was something in his eyes, a warmth, a sincerity, that made Ethan's heart ache in a way he had not felt in years. Lily, who was often shy with strangers, had instantly and unconditionally accepted this powerful, intimidating man into her world. Her innocent validation was like a key turning in a lock deep inside Ethan. It made him see the kindness that lay beneath the CEO's armor, a kindness he had only glimpsed the night before. The next week was a strange dream. At work, the rumors were flying. Whispers followed Ethan down the hallways. People looked at him differently, with a new curiosity and a hint of deference. He tried to ignore it, burying himself in spreadsheets and data models. But the world had shifted. The real problem was Mark. He started with text messages, long, rambling screeds that veered from nostalgic pleading to outright threats. Ethan blocked his number, but Mark created new ones. Then came the emails to his work account, which he dutifully forwarded to security, as Julian had instructed. The escalation came on a Wednesday evening. Ethan was walking home from the subway station when he saw him. Mark was waiting across the street from his apartment building, leaning against a car, watching. The sight sent a cold spike of fear through him. He turned around, his heart pounding, and walked quickly back to the station, taking the train several stops in the wrong direction before calling a taxi to take him to a friend's house. He called Julian. He did not know why, only that he had promised to. "He was waiting for me," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly once he was safely inside his friend Mia's apartment. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Julian spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Where are you now?" "I'm at a friend's. I'm safe." "This has gone far enough," Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm sending a car. Pack a bag for you and Lily. You're staying with me until this is handled." "Julian, I can't ask you to do that. It's too much." "You're not asking, Ethan. I'm insisting. Your safety and Lily's is not negotiable. The car will be there in 20 minutes. And so, Ethan found himself being ushered into Julian Thorne's penthouse. It was less a home and more an art gallery, a vast, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire glittering expanse of the city. The furniture was sparse and elegant, the colors muted shades of gray and white. It was beautiful, sterile, and silent. Lily, however, was not intimidated. She immediately kicked off her shoes and ran across the gleaming hardwood floor, her socks making a soft, skidding sound. "Wow, it's like a castle in the sky." The forced proximity was both a comfort and a source of excruciating tension. Julian gave them a guest wing that was larger than their entire apartment, but the shared space of the living area and kitchen became the stage for their strange, new domesticity. The first morning, Ethan came into the kitchen to find Julian, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit, making coffee. He had already set out a bowl of Lily's favorite cereal and a carton of milk on the counter. The simple, thoughtful gesture made Ethan's chest feel tight. They fell into a strange rhythm. Julian would leave for the office before they woke up and return late in the evening. But he was always there for dinner. They would eat together at the massive glass dining table, the three of them looking like a tiny, improbable family in the cavernous room. One evening, Ethan was helping Lily with her homework when Julian came home, looking exhausted. He loosened his tie and sank onto the sofa, watching them.
"We're learning about planets,"
Lily announced, holding up a worksheet.
"Did you know Jupiter is the biggest?"
"I did," Julian said, his voice soft. "It's mostly made of gas, a gas giant." Lily's eyes widened. "Like a big toot?" Ethan shot her a warning look, but Julian let out a low, genuine laugh. The sound was so unexpected, so rich and warm, that it seemed to fill the entire sterile space. It was the first time Ethan had ever heard him truly laugh, and it was a revelation. He saw the man behind the CEO, the person who was not just powerful, but perhaps also deeply lonely. The penthouse, which had at first felt like a cage of glass and steel, began to feel like a sanctuary. Lily's colorful drawings started appearing on the stainless steel refrigerator, held up by magnets Julian had bought specifically for that purpose. Her bright pink unicorn backpack was often left by the front door, a splash of chaotic childhood in the midst of pristine order. Ethan found himself watching Julian, noticing the small things. The way he would always listen intently when Lily spoke, no matter how nonsensical her stories were. The way his shoulders would lose some of their tension when he came home and saw them there. The way his eyes would sometimes find Ethan's across the room, holding his gaze for a moment too long, an unspoken question passing between them. The intimacy was in the quiet moments. Julian showing Lily how to use his high-tech telescope to find the moon. Ethan making Julian a cup of tea late one night when he was working, and Julian looking up from his laptop with a gratitude so profound it was startling. They were living together, sharing a life in miniature, and the pretense that had started it all was beginning to feel dangerously, wonderfully real. The pressure from the outside world continued to mount. An article appeared in a notorious business gossip column, hinting at a scandalous office romance involving the reclusive CEO of Thorn Industries. It was vague, but the implication was clear. At work, the board of directors called a special meeting. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He was a liability, a stain on Julian's perfect, controlled world. The guilt was a heavy cloak he could not take off. He was putting Julian's reputation, his entire company, at risk. And for what? So he and his daughter could hide in a gilded cage from a ghost he should have been able to exorcise on his own years ago. One night, a storm rolled in over the city, mirroring the tempest in Ethan's soul. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows, and distant thunder rumbled like a discontented giant. Lily was asleep, safe in her room, but Ethan could not rest. He paced the vast living room, the city lights below blurred and distorted by the water on the glass. He had to leave. It was the only way. He could take Lily and go to his sister's in Oregon. Disappear. It would be hard, but it would be better than dragging Julian down with him. He heard footsteps and turned to see Julian standing there, still in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He held 2 glasses, an amber liquid sloshing inside them. "You're wearing a hole in my floor," Julian said, his voice a low rumble. He handed Ethan a glass. It was whiskey. "Talk to me, Ethan." Ethan took a sip, the fiery liquid burning a welcome path down his throat. "I can't do this anymore, Julian. I can't let you do this. The board, the rumors. I'm destroying everything you've built." "That's for me to worry about, not you." "But it is my fault." Ethan's voice rose, cracking with the strain. "This is my mess. Mark is my problem. I should never have let you get involved. We have to leave. Lily and I. We can go stay with my sister until I figure something out." Julian set his glass down on a table with a sharp click. His eyes in the stormy light were dark and intense. "No, you can't stop me," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "You've done more than enough. You've kept us safe. But the pretense is over. The threat to your company is real. I won't be the cause of your downfall." "Do you really think that's what this is about?" Julian took a step closer, his presence seeming to suck the very air from the room. "Do you think my company is what I'm concerned with right now? Do you think any of this house, this life, meant anything to me before you and Lily walked through that door?" The raw emotion in his voice stunned Ethan into silence. "This place was a museum," Julian continued, his voice dropping, becoming thick with a vulnerability Ethan had never imagined possible. "It was a collection of expensive, empty things. I was a ghost here, Ethan. I'd come home to the silence, and I'd work until I was too exhausted to feel how profoundly alone I was. And then you came. You and that little girl with her purple giraffes and her questions about gas giants. You filled the silence. He took another step, closing the space between them. He was so close now, Ethan could feel the heat radiating from his body. This was never about just protecting you, Julian whispered, his gaze dropping to Ethan's lips. That was the excuse. The truth is, that night at the gala, when I saw you, it was the first time I had felt anything other than the weight of my own obligations in years. And pretending to be your husband was the most honest thing I'd done in a decade. The confession hung between them, more intimate than any touch. The storm outside raged, the rain a frantic drumming against the glass. But inside the penthouse, there was only a thundering silence. The sound of two hearts beating in the same unsteady rhythm. Ethan's breath hitched. The carefully constructed walls around his own heart, built from fear and past hurts, crumbled to dust. He saw not the powerful CEO, but a man as lost and lonely as he had been. A man who had offered him a shield, and had, in turn, found a reason to feel again. Julian. Ethan breathed his name, a question and a plea all in one. Julian's hand came up, his fingers gently cupping Ethan's jaw. His thumb stroked softly over his cheekbone. The touch was electric, a current of longing and suppressed hope that arced between them. I'm not pretending anymore, Ethan, Julian murmured, his stormy eyes searching Ethan's. Are you? Ethan could only shake his head, his own eyes filling with tears he refused to let fall. He leaned into the touch, a surrender and an acceptance. That was all the answer Julian needed. He lowered his head, and his lips met Ethan's. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of want and need, of loneliness and discovery. It was the rain on the windows and the thunder in the distance. It was the taste of whiskey and the salt of unshed tears. It was deep and certain, a desperate, claiming pressure that spoke of years of solitude and a future that had, in an instant, become terrifyingly, beautifully possible. Ethan's hands came up to grip Julian's shirt, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into pure sensation. This was real. Whatever happened next, whatever the world threw at them, this moment, this kiss, was the unshakable truth. The world came back into focus slowly. The sound of the rain, the soft light of the lamps, the solid feel of Julian's hands now resting on his waist. They broke apart, but only slightly, their foreheads resting against each other as they caught their breath. The air between them was charged, thick with everything that had just been said and done. So, Ethan said, his voice a little shaky, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. I guess we're not leaving. Julian's answering smile was a slow, brilliant dawn. No, we're not leaving. We're staying. We're fighting. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in the morning sun. The shift in the atmosphere inside the penthouse was just as dramatic. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, hopeful intimacy. When Julian left for work, he paused at the door, turned back, and kissed Ethan again, a soft, lingering press of his lips that was a promise for the day ahead. Julian Thorne at war was a terrifyingly efficient thing to behold. He did not rage or shout. He moved with the cold, precise strategy of a grandmaster playing chess. He had his legal team and private investigators compile a complete dossier on Mark Coulson. It turned out Mark had a history of financial misconduct, of bullying subordinates, and, most damningly, 2 previous partners who had filed restraining orders against him for harassment. It was all compiled, documented, and delivered to Mark's new employers and the district attorney's office simultaneously. By noon, Mark's professional life was over. A restraining order was issued, legally barring him from coming anywhere near Ethan or Lily. The threat that had haunted Ethan for years was not just neutralized, it was annihilated. Next, Julian dealt with the board. He called the special meeting himself. Ethan had insisted on being there, standing by his side. They walked into the boardroom together, a silent, united front. The whispers died as they entered. Julian did not offer excuses or apologies. He laid out the facts of Mark's harassment campaign with cold clarity. He then looked at the dozen stern-faced men and women around the polished table. Ethan Hayes and his daughter were the targets of a dangerous and unstable individual, Julian said, his voice calm and steady. I offered them my protection. I will not apologize for that. My personal life has never and will never interfere with my duties as CEO of this company. However, my first duty is to my family. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. And Ethan and Lily are my family. If that is a conflict this board cannot accept, then I will tender my resignation, effective immediately. The ultimatum was a stunning gamble. He was placing his entire career, the empire he had built, on the line for them. For Ethan. The silence in the room was absolute. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a mixture of terror and overwhelming love. It was one of the oldest board members, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who finally broke the silence. She looked from Julian's resolute face to Ethan's nervous but determined one. A small, shrewd smile touched her lips. "Well, Julian," she said, her voice dry, "it's about time you found something more important than quarterly reports. The board has no issue. We trust your judgment. Now can we please move on to the actual agenda?" And just like that, it was over. The rumors were silenced, the corporate threat diffused. As they walked out of the boardroom, Julian's hand found Ethan's, their fingers lacing together in a gesture that was no longer a performance, but a simple, profound statement of fact. That evening, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the sofa, the city lights spread out before them like a blanket of scattered jewels. The reason for their forced proximity, the danger that had thrown them together, was gone. They were free. And in that freedom, there was a new, quieter kind of tension. A question of choice. "The threat is gone," Ethan said softly, voicing the thought that hung between them. I could go back to my apartment now." Julian turned to him, his expression serious. "Is that what you want?" "I want to know what this is," Ethan answered honestly, his heart in his throat. "Without the danger, without the crisis, just you and me. I need to know this is a choice, Julian, for both of us." Julian took both of Ethan's hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip steady. "When I told the board you were my family, it wasn't a strategy, Ethan. It was the truth. The only thing I'm interested in resigning from is the life I had before you." He shifted closer, his stormy eyes holding Ethan's with an unwavering intensity. "I am choosing you. I am choosing this. I want to wake up with you, not because we're hiding, but because we're home. I want to help Lily with her homework and see her drawings on our refrigerator. I want a life with you. If you'll have me." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, and this time he let them fall. They were tears of relief, of a joy so vast it was painful. For years his life had been about survival, about protecting Lily, about being cautious and small. Julian was offering him not just safety, but a future, a partnership, a family built not on circumstance, but on a conscious, deliberate choice. "Yes," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "God, yes." Julian leaned in and kissed him, and this kiss was different from all the others. It was not born of desperation or confession. It was quiet and deep, and full of the promise of 1,000 peaceful mornings to come. It was the start of everything. 6 months later, the scent of freshly turned earth and damp leaves filled the air. Ethan pressed a small seed into the soil, the dirt cool and rich beneath his fingertips. He was on his knees in the backyard of a house, a real house with a gabled roof, a slightly crooked front porch, and a sprawling oak tree that was perfect for a swing. It was not Julian's sleek, impersonal penthouse, nor was it his own cramped, temporary apartment. It was theirs. He looked up, a smile touching his lips. A few feet away, Lily was directing a crucial construction project involving a pile of mud and several twigs. Her face was smeared with dirt, and she was chattering away to her co-foreman. Julian was kneeling beside her, listening with grave seriousness to her instructions. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt and jeans that were stained with grass and soil. He looked younger, more relaxed and content than Ethan had ever seen him. The powerful, intimidating CEO was gone, replaced by a man learning the intricate architectural principles of a 6-year-old's mud castle.
No,
Lily instructed, pointing a muddy finger.
the big stick is the flag. It has to go on top of the tower, Julian.
Of course, the flag tower. My apologies, Julian said with perfect solemnity, carefully planting the twig where she had indicated. The scene was so simple, so wonderfully, beautifully normal, that it made Ethan's heart swell. This was their new reality. After neutralizing the threats, they had made their choices. Julian had restructured his role at the company, promoting a trusted colleague to handle more of the day-to-day operations, freeing himself to be home for dinner every night. They had sold the penthouse and Ethan's apartment and found this place together, a home with room to breathe, with a yard for Lily to play in. Their life was a tapestry of quiet moments. Making breakfast together in the sun-drenched kitchen, reading stories to Lily before bed, her tucked securely between them. The simple, profound comfort of falling asleep in Julian's arms every night and waking up there every morning. Julian caught Ethan's eye over Lily's head and smiled. It was a private, intimate smile, full of shared history and future promises. He left the mud castle in Lily's capable hands and walked over, kneeling in the grass beside Ethan. "How's the garden coming along?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "The peas are in. Carrots next," Ethan said, leaning into him, resting his head on Julian's shoulder for a moment. He breathed in his scent, a mixture of clean laundry, fresh air, and the man himself. Home. Julian's arm came around him, holding him close. They stayed like that for a long moment, simply watching their daughter play under the afternoon sun, the sound of her happy chatter a perfect soundtrack to their life. "You know," Julian said softly, his lips close to Ethan's ear, "I was thinking about that first night. At the gala?" Ethan smiled. "Oh, were you?" "I was," Julian confirmed. "I'm still not entirely sure what the proper etiquette is for this sort of thing, but I feel like I should ask properly this time." He shifted, turning to face Ethan fully. He took Ethan's muddy hand in his. His stormy eyes were clear and deep, filled with a love that still, after all these months, took Ethan's breath away. "Ethan Hayes," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "Will you pretend to be my husband? Forever?" Ethan's laugh was a bright, happy sound. He leaned in, brushing the dirt from Julian's cheek with his thumb. "Never again," he whispered. "I'll do it for real." He closed the small distance between them and kissed him. It was a soft, sure kiss, tasting of sunshine and soil, and the sweet, uncomplicated promise of a life they had chosen, a family they had built, and a love that was, finally, blessedly, real.